I already had the cab door slightly open when I saw the guy standing near the tank, his cell phone raised towards my truck, and he didn't look like someone taking a picture out of curiosity. He adjusted the angle as if he were checking something specific on the side of my truck bed, and when he realized I had noticed, he didn't lower his arm. The pump was still running, the diesel was flowing, and the gas station attendant had disappeared inside the station as if it wasn't his problem. The guy took 2 steps back, continuing to film, and moved his lips as if he were talking to someone on the phone, but I didn't hear any sound coming from there. At the same moment, a dark sedan parked further away turned on its headlights without starting the engine, shining directly on my rear. That's when I understood that this had already been happening before I even realized it. I had pulled into that 24-hour gas station on the Pennsylvania border around 2 in the morning, coming from a regular route out of Ohio with palletized dry cargo for a smaller distribution center. It wasn't cargo too valuable to require an escort, but it also wasn't something simple to replace if there was a problem. The parking lot was rather empty for that hour, just 2 trucks further away, and that sedan parked near the side of the main building. The yard lights were bright white, but there were shadowy spots between the pumps where anyone could lean against the wall without attracting attention. As soon as I parked, I noticed the dark car shifted slightly, but at the time I thought it was a coincidence. Now it didn't seem like a coincidence at all. My plan was simple: fill up the tank, use the restroom, grab a coffee, and continue my journey down I-80 before dawn. I'd already been driving for hours, so each stop needed to be purposeful, no distractions. I left the engine running out of habit, because that type of gas station tends to have strange activity in the early morning, and I don't like turning everything off in an unfamiliar environment. The trailer's seal was intact. I checked it quickly out of habit, and the cargo door showed no signs of tampering. Even so, I noticed the guy with the cell phone circled my truck while I was still at the pump. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the truck. The gas station itself was nothing special. The convenience store was too brightly lit, the coffee was weak, and the shelves were full of expensive things for someone who lives on the road. The attendant only appeared to activate the pump and went back inside without exchanging a word, as if he wanted to avoid conversation. On the other side of the yard, one of the trucks I had seen when I arrived was simply no longer there, but I didn't hear an engine or see any lights coming from it. The sedan was still parked, headlights off again, but the reflection of the bodywork indicated someone sitting in the driver's seat. That started to bother me in a practical, not emotional way. I've been driving for 16 years. I've seen credit card scams. I've seen people trying to open the cabin door while the driver sleeps. I've seen attempts to distract while someone else handles the cargo. The pattern usually involves someone observing a routine, choosing a target who seems more distracted or tired. What wasn't common was the person making it so clear that they were observing. The raised cell phone, the overly still posture, the fact that they weren't pretending to be doing something else. It seemed like a reaction test, and at that moment I was giving exactly the reaction he wanted. When I finished refueling, I noticed he had changed position again, now near the back of my trailer, as if he were checking something near the seal. I didn't see him touch the door, but the distance wasn't great. The sedan, without warning, started its engine gently, the sound low, almost muffled. The gas station attendant went to pick up some trash near the entrance and avoided looking in our direction. I still had the pump receipt in my hand when I felt that the safe stopping interval had already passed the limit. I was still holding the fuel receipt when I decided not to go into the store for coffee. I put the paper in my shirt pocket and went straight back to the cabin, pretending nothing was out of the ordinary. Before going upstairs, I ran my hand over the trailer's seal as if just checking the number, but in reality, I was feeling if it had been forced. The plastic was firm, cold, with no apparent looseness. Even so, something about its position seemed slightly different from what I remembered a few minutes before. It wasn't broken, but it also didn't seem to be at exactly the same angle. I got into the cabin and left the door open for a few seconds, watching in the side mirror. The guy with the cell phone didn't run away or try to hide it. He just took 2 steps back, typed something, and turned to the side as if waiting for a reply. The sedan's headlights came back on, but it remained stationary. That gave me the feeling that there was more than one stage to what they were doing. It didn't seem like an immediate robbery. It seemed like preparation. The object that made me hesitate was the retractable baton I keep in the side door compartment. It's not something I like to use, but I've kept it there since an old incident in Texas. My first decision was simple: get out of there without confrontation, ignore any provocation, and get back on the highway. But as I turned the key and adjusted the gear shift, I saw in the mirror that the guy was now right behind the trailer, out of direct range of my headlights. I didn't have a clear view of what he was doing. I thought about getting out again and going over there, but that would put me in the space they seemed to control. Instead, I reversed slightly, less than a meter, just to force whoever was behind me to move. The man quickly moved aside, raising his hand as if I had made a mistake, but his face showed no surprise. It showed calculation. The sedan moved forward a few centimeters as well, maintaining a constant distance. That confirmed it wasn't a parking coincidence. The unexpected change came when the cabin radio crackled with a short interference, even though I hadn't changed the channel. It wasn't a clear voice, just noise and a popping sound, but the moment was too precise to ignore. I wasn't using the CB radio at that instant. I looked again at the seal in the rearview mirror and had the impression that the left door of the trailer was slightly misaligned at the base, something minimal, something only someone who lives on the road notices. That's when I understood that getting out of there might not be enough anymore. I kept the truck stationary for a few seconds longer than usual, assessing every movement around me in the mirror. The man behind the trailer didn't run or feign surprise when I slightly reversed. He simply walked to the side of the sedan and leaned against the door, looking at the back of my cargo box as if he were still checking something specific. The left door still had that minimal misalignment at the base, a detail too small to be a common structural flaw. Nothing was broken, nothing was visibly tampered with, and yet the feeling that someone had interfered remained strong. It didn't seem like improvisation. It seemed like a well-calculated test. As I moved toward the gas station exit, the sedan pulled out alongside me, maintaining exactly 2 parking spaces behind me. It didn't accelerate to pressure me, nor did it stay far enough away to seem like a coincidence. A few kilometers later, another dark car appeared ahead. Same low silhouette, same discrete taillight pattern. I didn't see it overtake at any point. It simply moved into the right lane. The car in front began to vary its speed slightly, creating an irregular rhythm, while the one behind maintained a fixed distance. It wasn't direct intimidation, it was controlled containment. What bothered me most was realizing they weren't trying to force me to stop immediately. If their intention was a quick robbery, they would have acted at the gas station or blocked the road right there. Instead, they kept constantly following me, as if waiting for a more isolated spot or a mistake on my part. I tried reducing my speed by 10 miles below the limit, and both cars adjusted to the same pattern, neither overtaking nor slowing down. The misalignment of the door came back to my mind with more weight than before, and it was then that I began to consider that perhaps the target wasn't just the cargo inside the trailer. The consequences began before I made any definitive decisions. The car in front slowed down more abruptly than usual, forcing my vehicle to lose momentum on a slight incline I knew well. The sedan behind closed in enough that I didn't have a comfortable margin for progressive braking. I was still assessing escape routes when I felt a different vibration coming from the trailer. Not an impact, but a short, dry internal displacement. The seal remained intact, but the behavior of the vehicle indicated that something had changed back there. It wasn't ordinary loose weight, it was recent interference. Without warning, the vehicle in front pulled onto the shoulder as if it had a mechanical problem, but remained parallel to my axis for a few seconds. The one behind moved forward slightly, closing the lateral space and forcing me to maintain a straight line. That's when I saw in the mirror a third headlight appearing further behind, low beam, approaching too quickly to be normal traffic. That transformed the situation of following into a gradual encirclement. I still hadn't decided to confront anyone, but the window of safe escape was narrowing with each passing meter. The real breakthrough happened when the car that had been on the shoulder returned to the lane, now in front of me and closer than before, slowing down again for no apparent reason. I had to brake more firmly, and the car responded with a slight lateral pull. The sedan behind maintained constant pressure, without honking, without gestures, just a solid presence. For the first time, I considered stopping and resolving the situation right there. but their position showed that this was exactly the expected reaction. It was at that moment that I understood that if I made the wrong move, I wouldn't get out of there driving. I forced a controlled downshift until I saw a lit area a few kilometers ahead, a side access road leading to an industrial yard that was closed at that hour. Before they could adjust the roadblock again, I pulled the steering wheel firmly to the right and entered without signaling, using the weight of the vehicle to my advantage. The car in front couldn't react in time, and the sedan behind braked too hard to maintain alignment. I stopped sideways near the metal gate, honked continuously, and left the engine at high revs, drawing the attention of any camera or guard that might be there. No one got out of the three vehicles. They reversed almost together and disappeared down the highway as if they had never been with me. I waited a few minutes before leaving the cabin. I checked the seal with direct light and noticed a recent mark at the base of the door, something thin, like an attempt to test the fit without breaking the seal. Nothing had been taken, but someone had tried to gauge time, reaction, and vulnerability. I called the state police and filed a simple report, without many details beyond the description of the cars. I continued my journey after that, but the rest of the trip felt like every reflection in the mirror was a real close-up. I managed to drive away. What remained was the certainty that I had been assessed before being attacked. After that, I didn't return to that gas station even though it was practically on a route for that delivery line. There was no damage to the cargo, no formal violation of the seal, and the police report was filed as an incident without further development. Even so, I began to notice a different pattern in my own stops, choosing busier locations, avoiding off-peak hours, and reducing time outside the cabin to the bare minimum. What struck me most wasn't the near blockage on the road, but the behavior at the gas station, the open and calculated way of observing. It seemed like the initial phase of something bigger, not an isolated mistake. I keep driving, I keep delivering on time, and the truck remains structurally unchanged. But every time I see someone stop too long with their cell phone pointed at my truck, I no longer think it's curiosity. I think it's a test. I think it's silent coordination. And I think about how long it would have taken me to notice if they had decided to act that first early morning. Since then, I refuel looking more in the rearview mirrors than at the pump. Before we move on to the next story, hit like. It might seem simple, but it signals to YouTube that this content is worth recommending to more people. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to keep up with the next stories. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. That kind of engagement really helps the channel grow. The first sign wasn't a loud noise or a flashing light on the dashboard. It was the pressure gauge reading dropping too slowly to be a coincidence. I was driving at a constant speed on the highway in Indiana when I noticed the airline pressure dropping in short intervals, stabilizing for a few seconds and then dropping a little more. There was no audible warning yet, but the brake pedal started responding with a slight delay, something minimal that only someone who drives every day notices. I downshifted to the right lane and tested light braking, feeling the system hold half a second later than expected. The problem is that slow air loss doesn't happen on its own in the middle of a clear stretch of road without apparent reason. I was coming from a regular shipment leaving Illinois bound for the interior of Ohio. Nothing serious. Dry cargo palletized and sealed at the distribution center. The route through Indiana was simple, a flat stretch, few long curves, and moderate traffic at that late afternoon time. The weather was stable, no rain, no sudden temperature changes that would justify a change in the pneumatic system. I had done a complete visual inspection before leaving, checking hoses, connections, and visible lines. Nothing indicated wear or visible leaks in the yard. Even so, the pressure gauge continued to drop at a rate too constant to be a random fault. Air brake systems don't usually lose pressure so silently, at least not when they're intact. Normally there's an audible squeak, a sudden oscillation, or a clear warning on the dashboard. In my case, it was a clean, progressive drop, as if someone had opened a minimal controlled gap. I tested light pumping to observe recovery, and the needle only rose partially before falling again. There was no truck tailgating or immediate emergency situation, but I already felt that my reaction time was decreasing. The technical detail didn't scream danger, but it suggested recent intervention. A few kilometers earlier, I had made a quick stop at a smaller gas station to use the restroom and check the external tie-downs. I wasn't out of the cab for more than 15 minutes. The parking lot was relatively crowded, nothing that directly caught my attention, but I remember a white utility vehicle parked very close to the rear axle of my trailer. At the time, I thought it was just bad parking. Now, as I watched the pressure slowly drop, that memory returned with a different weight. The loss wasn't fast enough to be a spontaneous defect, but it also wasn't slow enough to wait until the next urban area. I reduced my speed further and turned on the hazard lights, calculating the distance to the next escape area or wide shoulder. The pedal response remained stable, but slightly delayed. The highway in that section had a slight, almost imperceptible incline, enough to require fine braking control. No red alerts yet, no alarms triggered, just technical data indicating that something was wrong. The problem is that, when the warning sound finally arrives, it's usually too late for calm decisions. What bothered me was the regularity of the drop, almost mathematical. There was no strange vibration, no smell of burning canvas, no obvious external sign. Just the needle going down as if someone were turning a valve millimeter by millimeter. I looked in the rearview mirror to check the alignment of the assembly and didn't see anything loose or irregular. Even so, the practical feeling was clear. It hadn't started on the road. My first decision was not to wait for the audible alert to confirm what I was already seeing on the dashboard. I gradually slowed down and began looking for a shoulder wide enough to stop safely. The traffic behind me was still far away, which gave me a controlled margin for maneuver. I tested a firmer, progressive braking system and felt the system respond with a greater delay than before. The pressure gauge needle dropped 2 more points while I maintained constant pressure on the pedal. The object that immediately caught my attention was the manual brake control valve on the trailer. I activated it slightly to test the independent reaction of the mechanical horse. The response was weak, but it came, indicating that there was still air circulating in the system. If it were a complete structural failure, the collapse would be abrupt and accompanied by a noticeable noise. It looked like a measured leak, too small to cause immediate panic. I thought about continuing to the next urban exit, but that meant driving more miles with unstable tire pressure. If the line were to suddenly collapse on an inclined section, I would have seconds to react. I chose to signal and enter a wider shoulder section, almost a technical area. As I slowed down, I noticed that the drop in pressure accelerated slightly. It was subtle, but enough to confirm that the loss was not static. When I came to a complete stop, I left the engine running and got out for a quick visual inspection. I didn't hear a loud squeaking sound, just a thin hissing sound coming from the rear axle area of the trailer. I knelt down to locate the source and noticed something unusual about the secondary line connection. The hose appeared intact, but the fitting showed a slight looseness that wasn't there before. It wasn't natural wear and tear. It was an adjustment that was too recent to be a coincidence. The unexpected change came when I touched the connection and felt that it was only partially threaded. Someone had loosened it enough to create a controlled, but not complete leak. If I hadn't noticed it on the dashboard, the pressure would have dropped mid-descent. There were no signs of heavy tools, just carefully calculated manual turning. It then became clear that what had happened on the highway was no accident. While I was still kneeling beside the axle, a truck passed by, far too slowly for someone on a clear highway. It wasn't a routine inspection by a fellow driver. It was a deliberate slowdown to observe. The driver didn't honk or signal, just maintained a low speed for a few seconds before continuing on. I turned my attention to the line connection and noticed something that didn't match the natural vibration of driving. The thread wasn't just loose. It was positioned at the exact point where leakage is constant but not immediate. This requires intention, not carelessness. I manually tightened the connection and climbed into the cabin to monitor pressure recovery. The needle began to rise steadily, confirming that the system itself was not damaged. The problem was that while the pressure was returning to normal, the audible warning sounded briefly and then stopped on its own, as if it had been triggered by a previous sudden drop. This indicated that the loss was already more advanced than I had calculated. If I had continued a few more miles downhill, the near accident would no longer have been a possibility. Before pulling over to the side of the road, I did a more thorough visual inspection and noticed light shoe marks on the inside of the trailer's fender. It wasn't ordinary road grime. It was a recent impression, with a still-defined pattern. I immediately remembered the white utility vehicle parked very close by at the previous gas station. The contradiction was clear. Nobody messes with airlines out of curiosity. And nobody does it without expecting the driver to only notice when it's too late. I was still inside the cabin monitoring the pressure stabilization when I saw in the rearview mirror a white utility vehicle slowing down on the shoulder a few meters behind. It wasn't a police car. It had no markings, and it didn't seem to have a real malfunction. It maintained a safe distance, as if waiting for confirmation that I would return to the road. The pressure on the dashboard was almost normal, but I knew that confidence in the system wouldn't return so quickly. If it had just been vibration, no vehicle would have returned to the same point of stop. The consequences began before I even decided to leave. While I waited for the road to fully stabilize, a heavy truck pulled into the next lane and braked abruptly due to traffic ahead. Instinctively, I imagined what would have happened if my lane had given way at that moment while I was moving. The calculation was quick and straightforward. The braking distance would have doubled. The near-accident scene formed in my head before it became reality. It wasn't technical exaggeration. It was a concrete projection based on the numbers I had just seen on the dashboard. When I finally got back on the road, the white SUV pulled in right behind me, maintaining a minimal acceptable distance. There was no attempt to overtake, no gesture or honking, just a constant presence for a few kilometers until the next city exit. There it simply pulled in and disappeared without hesitation, as if its objective had already been accomplished. It was at this point that it became clear that the sabotage wasn't seeking direct confrontation, but rather an inevitable mistake at high speed. I drove to the next urban area and went straight into a larger inspection yard with bright lighting and visible cameras. I didn't want to risk continuing the journey as if nothing had happened, even with the pressure stabilized. I asked a mechanic on duty to check the entire pneumatic line of the trailer and the tractor unit, without initially mentioning what I suspected. He found the main connection firm, but confirmed that the secondary connection had been manually rotated beyond its normal vibration point. That wasn't wear and tear, it was recent human intervention. I filed a police report right there, describing the previous gas station, the white utility vehicle, and the shoe print on the fender. There was no direct evidence beyond the adjustment to the line, but the pattern was too clear to ignore. The report was classified as suspected sabotage with no identified perpetrator. No camera at the smaller gas station recorded a sufficient angle to show anyone tampering with the system. Operationally, I lost a few hours and had to justify a delay in delivery, but the cargo arrived intact. The real impact wasn't financial or mechanical, it was internal operational. I started checking connections twice before leaving any stop, even the quickest ones. I began avoiding parking with the rear axle exposed to lateral traffic. My confidence in the predictability of the pneumatic system ceased to be automatic. Technically, I corrected the fault right there. Psychologically, it continued to plague me for the following miles. After that day, I stopped treating inspections as routine mechanical tasks and started treating them as interference checks. It's not paranoia, it's a practical adjustment based on what I saw with my own eyes. The airline doesn't loosen at that exact point due to common road vibration, and nobody accidentally drives on that area of the rear axle. The memory of the white SUV pulling over to the side of the road wouldn't leave my head anytime soon. I continued driving the same route in the following weeks, but I changed small habits that previously seemed excessive. I avoid stopping with my side exposed to nearby vehicles, even at busy gas stations. I check connections after any stop outside a controlled area, even if I've only been out of the cabin for a few minutes. It may seem excessive to those who don't make a living from it, but near misses don't give you 2 warnings. The police report didn't result in a formal investigation or subsequent contact. Officially, it remained an isolated incident with no identified perpetrator. Technically, I solved the problem in a few minutes on the side of the road. But since then, every time I see the pressure gauge needle fluctuate half a point off range, I don't first think about wear and tear. I think about someone who prefers the error to happen on its own. I'd seen that car before, and it only made sense hours later. It was a gray sedan, too ordinary to attract attention, but the partial license plate I'd memorized from Montana reappeared when I was already crossing North Dakota. The problem is, I didn't see it overtake me at any point between states. It simply reappeared behind me, maintaining a safe distance as if it had entered the highway exactly where I was. And when I realized this wasn't an isolated coincidence, I was already in the third state. I was driving through Montana on a long rural stretch of two-lane road, with almost no traffic at that late afternoon hour. The load was simple, agricultural supplies, nothing that would justify an escort or special interest. The weather was clear, the sky was open, visibility was wide for miles, which made it easy to spot vehicles constantly in the rearview mirror. It was there that I saw the gray sedan for the first time, maintaining a steady distance for several kilometers. It wasn't accelerating to overtake, it wasn't slowing down to get out of the field of vision, it just stayed within the same comfortable range. When I stopped at a small gas station to refuel and use the restroom, the car didn't pull into the parking lot. It drove straight past on the highway, at least that's what I saw in the reflection of the pump. I was out of the cab for about 20 minutes, checked the seal and tire pressure, basic routine. I got back on the road, and a few miles later the same sedan reappeared behind me. Same color, same silhouette, same measured distance. The license plate wasn't fully visible, but the last three characters matched what I had seen before. This started to go beyond simple coincidence. Hours later, already crossing into North Dakota, I no longer actively remembered the car. The road had changed its pattern, even straighter, with fewer rest stops and almost no traffic. That's when I looked in the rearview mirror while adjusting it and saw the same gray model again, maintaining the same distance as in the afternoon. I hadn't seen it overtake me during a stop or cross my path on a single-lane stretch. It was simply there, as if it had entered the highway directly behind my vehicle. I started observing his driving style, speed variations and reactions to small changes I made. I slowed down 5 miles per hour below the speed limit. He slowed down as well. I gradually accelerated back to the limit. He followed without hesitation. There was no high beam, no attempt to overtake in a permitted lane. The pattern wasn't aggressive. It was too consistent to be random. The detail that bothered me the most was that at no point could I clearly see the driver in the mirror. The reflection was always misaligned. The glass slightly dark and the driver positioned inside the mirror outside my direct line of sight. It wasn't an open pursuit. It was a continuous presence, without apparent reason and without any timing error. And the strangest thing is that it didn't start to seem dangerous immediately. It started to seem impossible. My first decision was not to react as if it were an open pursuit. I needed practical confirmation before turning it into a real problem. I started mentally noting times, approximate mileage, and small road landmarks where the sedan remained within the same visual range. I adjusted the left rear view mirror a few degrees to widen the rear field of view. Every time I moved the angle, the car seemed to reposition itself exactly within the new frame. It didn't accelerate too much, nor did it get far enough away to disappear. I reduced my speed by 5 miles below the speed limit for a continuous stretch of almost 3 minutes. The sedan reduced its speed by the same amount, maintaining a constant distance. I accelerated back gradually to the legal limit. It followed without any abrupt changes. No high beams, no attempts to overtake at permitted points. It didn't seem like the impatience of an ordinary driver stuck behind a slow truck. It seemed like someone only interested in maintaining a fixed relative position. I decided to make a sudden stop on a rural side road leading to an open farm area. I didn't signal well in advance, I just slowed down and turned straight ahead to force a reaction. In my rearview mirror, I saw the sedan continue straight down the highway without braking, without hesitation. I waited, stopped for a full 2 minutes, engine running, observing the horizon. I returned to the road certain that I had ended any coincidence. A few miles later, the same car reappeared behind me, as if it had made a perfect U-turn calculation. The object that began to guide me was the secondary GPS on the dashboard. There was a little-used state bypass that crossed back into another state via a more isolated secondary stretch. I entered it without warning, using the long curve as visual cover. For a few kilometers, I didn't see anyone behind me, and for a moment I thought I had solved the pattern. Then, after a series of gentle curves, the gray sedan reappeared in the rearview mirror, maintaining the exact same interval it had been keeping since Montana. It was there that I abandoned the simple hypothesis of coincidence. There was no visible overtaking during the stop, no registered intersection in my field of vision. He simply disappeared and reappeared at strategic points, as if he knew my route before I confirmed each decision. There was still no direct threat, no aggressive gesture, no attempt to block, just a presence too constant to be casual, and that began to weigh on me silently in the cabin. After he reappeared on the state bypass, I stopped testing speed and started testing predictability. I maintained a constant pace for almost 20 miles without any variation, as if I were completely ignoring his presence. The sedan remained at the same relative point, neither closer nor further away. On a long, straight stretch where any ordinary driver would take the opportunity to overtake a heavy truck, he simply didn't move. The road was clear, visibility was perfect, no legal restrictions on overtaking. Even so, he preferred to stay behind. A few kilometers later, I crossed into the third state of the route, entering an even more isolated rural area. I hadn't stopped long enough for another vehicle to reappear so precisely. The contradiction was clear. There wasn't enough time for someone to disappear from my sight and reappear synchronized with each detour. I didn't see a change of license plates. I didn't see a second identical vehicle, but I also didn't see a logical continuity between the points. It appeared in positions that would require prior calculation of my route before I even decided. That's when I noticed another unsettling detail. Whenever I changed lanes to avoid a road irregularity or adjust my alignment, he would change almost instantly, but never abruptly. It didn't seem like belated imitation. It seemed like slight anticipation. There was no direct contact, no visible gesture from the driver, just constant synchronization. And the more I tried to explain it rationally, the less rational the pattern of presence seemed. I was already driving with my attention more divided between the road and the rearview mirror when I decided to stop for gas in the third state. It wasn't a relaxed pause. It was a calculated move. As I slowed down to enter the illuminated parking lot, I looked for the sedan in the mirror, expecting to see it turn behind me. It wasn't on the road at that moment. I pulled into the pump and, even before turning off the engine, I saw the same car parked near the side of the building, as if it had been there for some time. I hadn't seen any overtaking in the last few kilometers. I filled up the tank without taking my eyes off the reflections in the shop window. The car remained motionless, but it didn't seem empty. The silhouette in the front seat didn't move enough to be a casual distraction. When I finished, I took a slow drive around the lot before leaving, pretending to check the trailer. I passed close enough to confirm the last 3 characters of the license plate. They were the same ones I had memorized back in Montana. I left the gas station and didn't return to the main highway. I turned onto a parallel secondary road for a few kilometers, completely changing the flow of the planned route. During a longer straight stretch, the rearview mirror showed only empty asphalt. Then, after a long curve surrounded by tall vegetation, the sedan reappeared behind me, maintaining the exact same interval it had been keeping since the first encounter. It became clear then that it wasn't just a constant presence. It was anticipation. After he reappeared on the back road, I stopped testing my reaction time and started testing my routine. I maintained a steady speed for almost half an hour without any sudden changes, as if accepting his presence behind me. The sedan kept the same distance, neither closer nor further away, always out of immediate reach but always visible. There was no attempt to overtake, even on wide, completely open stretches. It didn't seem like an impatient driver. It seemed like someone only interested in keeping up without directly interfering. When I reached a small town near the next border, I entered a well-lit area with cameras visible on every corner. I made 2 extra turns within the urban perimeter before returning to the main route. For a few minutes, the car didn't appear, but upon rejoining the open highway, after a flat stretch of almost 3 miles, it reappeared behind me, occupying the same relative point in the rearview mirror. There was no aggressive acceleration, no high beams, just a perfect continuation of the pattern. I didn't confront, I didn't stop to wait, and I didn't try to block any path. I decided to follow the planned route to the final destination without offering any additional isolated scenario. Upon arriving at the distribution center, I entered directly into the enclosed and illuminated yard before turning off the engine. The sedan didn't enter. It drove straight through the main road and disappeared into the darkness of the next road. Operationally, nothing was violated. But since that day, I monitor the rearview mirror not only for traffic. I monitor it for impossible repetition. After that route, I stopped believing that an open road means automatic anonymity. There was no approach, no attempt to block, no direct threat that could be formally recorded. Officially, nothing happened. Still, 3 different states, 3 reappearances at the exact point in the rearview mirror, and no visible overtaking don't add up to simple coincidence. There may be a technical explanation for each isolated stretch. What doesn't add up is the sum of them. I continued driving in the following weeks, but I started varying my schedule and stopping points without a fixed pattern. I don't announce my route on the radio, and I avoid repeating predictable sequences between states whenever possible. Whenever I take a secondary detour, I observe not only who is behind me, but who reappears after the curve. What matters most is not their direct presence, but the feeling that someone already knows your next decision before you confirm it. This changes the way you drive even when nothing is happening. I never saw the sedan again after that delivery. No incident, no report, no follow-up calls. Maybe it was too much of a coincidence to seem natural. Maybe not. What remained was the certainty that absence of confrontation doesn't mean absence of intention. And since then, when a car stays too long in the same spot in my mirror, I don't think about ordinary traffic. I think about a pattern. If you're still here, you're exactly who this channel is for. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with your location and the time where you are right now. That engagement helps YouTube push these stories to more night drivers out there. Thanks for listening. Stay alert out there.